Hi, unique souls. Today we are continuing on lesson 13. A meaningless world engenders fear. Today's idea is really another form of the preceding one, except that it is more specific as to the emotion aroused. It is not just that it upsets you. It makes you fearful. Actually, a meaningful world is impossible. Nothing without meaning exists. Nothing without meaning exists. However, it does not follow that you will not think you perceive something that has no meaning. Nothing without meaning exists. However, it does not follow that you will not think you perceive something that has no meaning. On the contrary, you will be particularly likely to think you do perceive it. This is because you do not want to realize that what you perceive has no meaning. This is because you do not want to realize that what you perceive has no meaning. Once again, if what I see out there in the world has no meaning, the thought within me that gave rise to it has no meaning either. If what I see out there in the world has no meaning, the thought within me that gave rise to it has no meaning either. Since I am my thoughts, it follows that I do not have any meaning, which means I do not exist. Therefore, rather than realize everything is meaningless, within and without, I will substitute my own meaning. Obviously, if I have perceived something I think is out there, which affects me, I have already pronounced it real. If I perceive something I think is out there, which affects me, I've already pronounced it real. And I want to keep the underlying thought real so I can continue to be real. And I want to keep the underlying thought real so I can continue to be real. Recognition of meaninglessness arouses intense anxiety in all the separated ones. The anxiety arises because at some level I realize that the meaningless extends to my existence. This idea will be returned to very shortly. It represents a situation in which God and the ego challenge each other as to whose meaning is to be written in the empty space the meaninglessness provides. The ego challenges, but God does not. This is why the world is in quotes. To the ego, then, competition is the nature of its relationship with God. To the ego, competition is the nature of its relationship with God. An empty space exists because the ego is nothing, yet it believes it must get to the emptiness before God to claim the Son's identity as its own. Thus, the perceived competition with the Creator. If my existence as an ego is predicated on the belief in one or the other, I exist at God's expense. I killed him so I can live. I'll project that thought and believe he's doing the same thing back to me. Today's class is a bit difficult to understand. I do definitely understand that if you are struggling to make sense of it, like comprehend it, like it's really, but I'll try to explain as much as possible. Basically, our understanding of the world as we perceive it, it is always clouded with our filters, right? Like whatever the meaning we give to the other world, like the other reality that we perceive, is the one that ego, the one that is separated from God's consciousness, God's perspective, right? Because there's no perspective of God. There's actually no perspective. Perspectiveness, non-perspectiveness, like that is what we can describe as God's consciousness. That's why when we really identify what we see and try to perceive whatever we see in the outside world, outer reality, and when we identify our perception with who we are, we're actually separating ourselves from God. So the ego can live, like separate from God, which is the cause of all illness, which is the cause of all unpeaceful life and all these feelings that we actually feel and the triggers and everything, because we let our perceptions rule our mind, rule our world, rule our internal and external reality. So basically, we're not letting God come to that empty space in our mind. He is doing the same thing back at me. Okay, this deeply rooted belief is that source of our perception that people are out to get us. People are out to get us, to hurt, abandon, sabotage us, because we accuse ourselves of doing the same to others, and ultimately to God. So when we actually attack others, or when we perceive others attacking us, we're actually attacking God in a sense, because that is what happens. And when we give negative or positive, especially negative meaning to what is going on, what's happening, it's just like, we're actually questioning God. Who are we to question God and whatever happens in the world? Yes, I said it. Yes, I said it. Okay, triggers. Because we accuse ourselves of doing the same to others and ultimately to God. As Jesus states near the end. Actually, this is like very important. I'm going to read it again. We really need to really embody and understand and comprehend this knowledge here. It's gem. It's real gem. The ego challenges, but God does not. That is why the world is in quotes. To the ego, then, competition is the nature of its relationship with God. An empty space exists because the ego is nothing. Yet, it believes it must get to the emptiness before God to claim the son's identity as its own. thus the perceived competition with the Creator. If my existence as an ego is predicated on the belief in one or the other, I exist at God's expense. I killed him so I can live. I'll project that thought and believe he is doing the same thing back to me. This deeply rooted belief is a source of our perception that people are out to get us, to hurt, abandon, and sabotage us, because we accuse ourselves of doing the same to others and ultimately to God. As Jesus states near to the end of the text, you never hate your brother for his sins, but only for your own. Okay, I have to repeat this again, like it's very important, it's very, striking. You never hate your brother for his sins, but only for your own. Whatever form his sins appear to take, it but obscures the fact that you believe them to be yours, and therefore meriting a just attack. It's quite the same as, while you're attacking others, while you're pointing fingers at others, criticizing as you're actually criticizing, you're actually, when I point a finger, it's like I am using these 3 fingers pointing back at myself, right? And also, anyone, any person cannot see in others what they don't have in themselves. The ego rushes in frantically to establish its own ideas there, fearful that the void may otherwise be used to demonstrate its own impotence and unreality. And on this alone, it is correct. Namely, that it is nothing. The ego knows, as I have explained before, that its power rests in the decision marker. Because the ego in and of itself is important to ensure that we never recognize its inherent nothingness and meaninglessness, it seeks to make itself important and powerful through sin, guilt, and fear. Sin, guilt, fear. Sin, guilt, fear. Sin, guilt, fear. If I have sinned against God and destroyed him, I'm certainly important and powerful. This also makes me fearful, but at least I have become something that God notices, which also makes me important. Enlightenment. Yeah. The most frightening thing of all is to realize God does not even know about us, because then we are literally nothing important and unreal. Thus, we want God to pay attention to us, either because we are his most devoted follower or the most wretched, I don't know how to pronounce this word, sinner. It makes no difference to the ego as long as God takes notice. Our real fear, of course, is that he knows nothing about us. Somewhere deep inside, we know that to be true, but rather than accept its truth, we cover it over with the ego's lies. First with the thoughts of separation, sin, guilt, fear. Sin, guilt, fear. Sin, guilt, fear. And next with a world that reflects those thoughts. It is essential, therefore, that you learn to recognize the meaningless and accept it without fear. This acceptance comes from developing a relationship with Jesus or the Holy Spirit that allows you to look at your ego without fear, helping you realize its meaninglessness. If you are fearful or guilty about your ego, or if you embrace it, you obviously believe it is real. Once again, however, if you step back and watch this oddly assorted procession go by, you realize it is nothing. Understanding its meaning lies in trying to protect you from what is meaningful. Finally, since we want that meaningfulness, more than anything else, is our identity as God's Son, we will then realize everything else makes no sense and choose against it. If you are fearful, it is certain that you will endow the world with attributes that it does not possess and crowd it with images that do not exist. In this sense, we talk about the world as powerful. We talk about the world as powerful. We talk about the world as powerful, hostile, threatening, wonderful, peaceful, blissful, holy, etc. These are its attributes, and the images that do not exist are everything we see in the world, which are, of course, the projections of thoughts that do not exist. Okay. Let us read this again. In this sense, we talk about the world as powerful, hostile, threatening, wonderful, peaceful, blissful, holy, etc. These are its attributes, and the images that do not exist are everything we see in the world, which are, of course, the projections of thoughts that do not exist. That do not exist. That do not exist. To the ego, illusions are safety devices, as they must also be to you who equate yourself with the ego. As they must also be to you who equate yourself with the ego. Safety devices are defenses. Sin, guilt, fear, and the world that arises from there are illusions. Safety devices are defenses. Sin, guilt, fear, and the world that arises from them are illusions, the purpose of which is to preserve the fundamental illusion that exists as a separate individual. And now we go to the blockbuster line in the next paragraph. The exercises for today, which should be done about 3 or 4 times for not more than a minute, or so at most each time, are to be practiced in a somewhat different way from the preceding ones, with eyes closed. Okay, let's close our eyes. Take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. Bring it up to the chest. Start with your belly. and bring to the chest and hold, 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 and exhale. Let's take another deep breath. Bring it up to the chest. Hold, 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 and exhale. Don't open your eyes. Keep it closed and repeat today's idea to yourself. I am looking at a meaningless world. I am looking at a meaningless world. I am looking at a meaningless world. A meaningless world engenders fear. 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 Keep repeating to yourself with maybe in a silence. You don't have to say it out loud. A meaningless world engenders fear. A meaningless world engenders fear. A meaningless world engenders fear. Keep repeating. And open your eyes and look about you slowly, saying, I'm looking at a meaningless world. I'm looking at a meaningless world. I'm looking in a meaningless world. And now close your eyes and repeat with me. A meaningless world engenders fear because I think I am in competition with God. A meaningless world engenders fear because I think I am in a competition with God. A meaningless world engenders fear because I think I'm in a competition with God. A meaningless world engenders fear because I think I'm in a competition with God. A meaningless world engenders fear because I think I'm in a competition with God. We go from our mind's thoughts to our body's perceptions and then back within to state it once again. The world is fundamentally meaningless, yet we strive to give it meaning, since that ultimately gives meaning to our separated self. Listening to the ego, we make up a thought system of sin, guilt, and fear. Our sin of separation leads to the experience of guilt, which culminates in the fearful belief that we deserve to be punished by a vengeful God, who now is in mortal competition with us for existence. Either he survives or we do, or as the manual states, kill or be killed. But the inherent meaninglessness of this constellation of insanity does not preclude its having tremendous power, for we have invested our belief in it. Such investment means we must strive to give it meaning so we can defend against the ego's meaningless thought system, which is the basis for our meaningless identity. You can open your eyes, by the way, if you haven't already. I'm looking at a meaningless world. Looking at a meaningless world. Meaningless. To summarize this important point, when I realize the world is nothing, since it is simply a defense against my mind's thoughts, I'm drawn back to these thoughts. If the world is meaningless and I am meaningless, if the world is meaningless and I am meaningless, I do not exist, which means God has won. But rather than lose the battle, I strive to give meaning to myself and to the world around me. Jesus is helping us realize, my lovely dear friend Yeshua, how we project everything onto the world. If we pay careful attention to our perceptions and what we value here, we would realize none of them comes from anything inherent in the world, because there is no world. If we pay careful attention to our perceptions and what we value here, we would recognize none of them comes from anything inherent in the world, because there is no world. They are but the results of a need within ourselves to justify and reinforce the spurious fact that we exist. You may find it difficult to avoid resistance in one form or another to this concluding statement. Whatever form such resistance may take, remind yourself that you are really afraid of such a thought because of the vengeance of the enemy. The fear is that this is a competition we cannot win. God will be victorious. The terror engendered by such insanity is beyond what we can tolerate. We defend against it by constructing a thought system and in a world behind which we can hide. Having become identified with this defense that culminates in the body, we resist having it taken from us, which exposing its foundation to the truth of the atonement will surely do. And so we do not think about the wrath of God. That thought, as horrifying as it is, nonetheless protects the individual identity, which in turn defends against our acceptance of the atonement. You are not expected to believe the statement at this point and will probably dismiss it as preposterous, not carefully, however, any signs of overt or covert fear which it may arouse. Obviously, if you are relatively new to A Course in Miracles, the statement will make no sense, but Jesus is asking for your vigilance, that you pay careful attention to any anxiety or fear that is within you. This is our first attempt at stating an explicit cause and effect relationship of a kind which you are very inexperienced in recognizing. Do not dwell on the concluding statement and try not to even to think of it except during the practice prayers. That will suffice at present. The cause and effect connection is between our thoughts, the ego's thought system of sin, guilt, fear, and the way we perceive the world. In other words, I'm fearful not because of what is outside me, but because of my thought system. I am fearful not because of what is outside me. I am fearful not because of what is outside me, not because of what is outside me. I'm fearful, but because of my thought system, which tells me that survival is between God and me. Note 2. How Jesus does not confront or attack our resistance. He simply and gently reminds us of the truth. This allows us to accept it when we are ready, without any pressure or guilt inflicted on us. A wonderful example for all course students. I am fearful not because of what is outside of me, but because of my thought system. It's a survival between the God and me. Yeah. Okay. It was a very intense lesson. Wishing you good luck in your journey.